Okay, so think of an experience. Think of how you would describe your journey coming in today to the course. How you describe your journey. Think of an experience of how you would describe. Or for example, say if you went home this afternoon and your partner said, "How was the course?" How would you describe it? Do you think? How would you describe an experience in a restaurant? What would you say if someone asked you, how was your experience in that restaurant? On a holiday, so you come back from vacation, and how was your holiday?
So I was at a Mother's Day assembly before I came here, so if I was to describe that, I would say it was hectic going emotional throughout, it going on.
Yes.
There were lots of people in there. I was conscious of time.
That's okay.
But,
And think about if you were to go into every detail of the experience, it would probably take as long as the experience itself.
Yeah.
So if someone said, "How was the restaurant?" and you told them what you saw, what you heard, what you felt, what you smelled, what you tasted, if you went into the whole sensory richness of the experience, it would probably take as long as the experience itself is not longer. It would, let's say at lunchtime, you decided to go to the local store. If I told you every detail about what I did, how I got there, every blade of grass I walked over, every detail, it would probably take me hours to do that. So what do? I express myself on a surface level. Okay. People have a problem, they do the same thing, whatever the issue might be. So the issue could be they have anxiety, they could be feeling down, they could be nervous about presenting. They will give you so much information, okay? Just like you mentioned there, the experience you had this morning, when you think about every time I click my fingers, there's 12 million. 12 million, now we know it's 12 million. They used to say it was 2, now we know it's closer to 12 million pieces of information that we filter, and that goes to that 1, 3, 4. So then we select the flavors. So if I passed 12 million information pieces to you to take in the palm of your hand, it wouldn't take long before the whole room was flooded. You filter it, and if I gave you 134 jelly babies, you could hold them in the palm of your hand, pass them on to the next person, pass them on to the next person, so on and so forth. But equally, whilst you're doing that, we talked about a series of filters. Okay, our beliefs, our values, our experiences, our meta programs have a series of filters. We delete, we generalize, distort information. That then in turn gives the internal representation, a state, a behavior. We appraise an event, we appraise certain situations. It's not the event itself, it has no meaning, it's the meaning we give the event. Okay, so from the point of view, imagine evolutionary history. Okay, we sort of touched on this yesterday. If what we're told that evolutionary history is what it is, it may not be the case. But let's say, for example, you wander away from your tribe. Let's say you wander away from your tribe. So I've wandered away from my tribe on my own. You guys are here, and I see a vicious animal coming after me. As I'm sprinting away from the animal, what do you think I'm going to say? What do you think I'm going to do as I'm sprinting away from the animal? What do you think I'm going to do if you guys are going that direction?
Shut up.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to sort of say, I'm not going to give you a full description of the animal. It's got furry hair, it's got I'm going to give you, I need to know. I'm going to delete information. Okay, I'm going to distort information as well. It could be friendly. But it was growling at me, it might not be friendly. So, so my appraisal of the situation, I could generalize as well. The generalization being there's a similar animal that attacked tribe members before. But equally, if we think about evolutionary history, we believe that evolutionary history is the way it was. We don't know. maybe they're more advanced than us, I don't know. But who knows? But let's say all things being the way they are, our understanding of evolution, we'd sort of just blurt out. Okay? But at a deeper level, the way we are processing that is not in the way we would express at a surface level, because you don't have time. It's a split reaction, that limbic response. What was quite interesting one time, many years ago, something comes to mind now, I was in some coaching with this woman, and it went really, really well. I was coaching her to, she was looking to go back into employment, presenting, and she was a very, very talented, articulate person who was looking to go back into work and sort of get her life back on track. And we'd been through 6 sessions. We got to pretty much the last session. We were going to, as you do, you sort of terminate and you fly the nest and go from there. And we got to the last session, and she'd got herself back in work. She was sort of functional again, got her life back, was going out, and so on and so forth. And I said, well, I sort of appraised the session. How did it all go? Anything else that you want to touch base on last session? And as you do. And she said, well, there's one thing. I said, what's the one thing? She says, well, I get a bit down sometimes. I said, well, yeah, okay, that's we can normalise that. We all do. And anything specific? And she goes, well, I feel if I was in a relationship, I'd be much happier. Okay, so she feels that if she's in a relationship, she'll be much happier. So cutting a long story short, I just said, well, I'm not a relationship coach or a dating coach, but enlighten me, what are you doing about going into a relationship? And she said, well, I'm on the date sites, I go out, and I've been going out, and it seemed to me she was doing all that one can do to get into a relationship. And in her words, she'd been in a volatile relationship in the past. I don't know, I'm going off what she said before. But anyway, all things said and done, she mentions she's going on dates, she's doing this, one or the other, and then she says, on a Tuesday evening, we have an all men are bastards evening with her friends. So I thought, wow, to be a fly in the wall. To be a fly in the wall. However one
has a name.
However one quantifies. So I could be psychoanalytical about the situation, and I'm sure there's reasons for that. But certain experiences in our life leave an imprint, and we can generalise. One would think about certain situations.
Is that a metaphor then, fly on the wall?
It could be if you want it to be. Not literally a fly in the wall, but I could be a fly in the wall. I hope so. Yeah, I mean a fly in the wall, so a passive observer. Someone who's sort of unknown. You don't notice a fly unless it's buzzing. But anyway, you broke my statement. You broke my statement. But I used counterexamples. I said to her, well, okay, it wasn't the only work we did. The work I was doing with her wasn't related to that. But I just used counterexamples. I knew from our journey she was very close to her brother and her dad. And I said, okay, what about your brother and your dad? She said, don't you talk about my... well, I didn't say anything. I'm just counterexampling as you do. And also I said, from the point of view, there's how many billion people in the world? Maybe billions of men in the world. All men. So, cutting a long story short, yeah, we won't go down there. But we get in situations where, for the most part, it might not be an issue. People are entitled to their rules, their beliefs, their values. But the goal is, if she wants a relationship, is that a problem, do you think? If you go into a relationship thinking all men are bastards, and they may well be, for all I know, but what do you think you'll see if that's your belief? But also you'll delete, and you've got your own set of criteria, but equally in saying that, there's that sort of, also that biased way of thinking. What you look for, you'll find. Yeah. Okay, I mentioned on the first part of the course, when I was working with this model who, she believed that in her eyes that she was ugly, she used to say. Albeit she got a lot of work out of doing what she did, so her belief deep down inside, both basically pretty experienced early on in life, was that she was... And modelling for her was a catalyst to to prove it to herself that she was attractive in the eyes of the corporation, because we know beauty is more than beauty is more than skin deep. There's many factors that contribute to that, but in her head, no matter how many jobs she got, she still thought that. Why? Because someone says you look really, really well. If 100 people say you look well, what do you think she focuses on? If one person says, I don't like the colour of your shoes, so 100 people say you look really, really well, and gets in one ear out the other ear. If one person says, I don't like the colour of your shoes, then she starts focusing on the rumination. So she deletes all that.
Sammy just said before
that
she's had, and it's the first time actually out of the few days we've been together, that today she's mentioned, I think, 3 different things about the school and positive things that kids have done for her and things that have been sent to her. But that's not her bigger focus. You acknowledge that before,
I mean, when a person starts to defend the generalisation, it means it's transformed for me into a self-preserved belief. When they start sort of defending a practical belief, it starts influencing the direction in their behaviour. So what they do behind the behaviour is the belief. So, okay, if I believe that you're a really nice person, and you are a nice person, I'm going to behave accordingly. If I believe someone is a bad person, then or a nasty person, then it's going to affect what I do. But equally, it's going to affect what they do in return. It can have an impact in that way, shape, or form. I mean, not to confuse. In my early life, I was a polarity responder. If you said I couldn't do something, I had to prove you wrong. So for me, I would build a generalization in my own mind. If you said I couldn't do something, like write a book or compete in sport or whatever it was, I'd have to go out of my way to ram it down. So it's quite polarity responder. But equal, that's another story for another day. To illustrate, it's quite interesting really, because we get caught up in these sort of situations. And I remember one time it was at Toastmasters, the presenting group. I do the speaking group and stuff. And she said to me that every time she heard the guy who was the chairperson there say table topic, who wants to do a table topic tonight, she would say, my heart starts pounding. I feel really, really clammy. I feel really, really nervous. I feel like my heart's going to burst out of my chest, so to speak. And she would say that, and it was like cause effect, because he said that A causes B. He said that, but not everyone reacted in the same way. It's her appraisal of the situation. It's the way she's appraising it in her own mind. So it's not necessarily Pavlovian where the bell rings and one salivates and the implicit link there, but equally from the point of view that table topic, who wants to do one, she'd be like, when that happens, and ironically, she sat next to me and she goes, oh no, every time I hear the word table topic, I just feel like running out of the room. My heart's pounding. And I just said to her, okay, I said, had anybody ever said something or announced something and your heart didn't start pounding? And it sort of stopped her in her tracks a little bit. She thought about it. And I go, has anybody ever said something to you and your heart started pounding in a good way? Nervous excitement. I won't tell you what she said after that, by the way. Yeah, I won't tell you what she said. Not at this time of day anyway. I walked into that. But anyway, cutting long story short, so it's almost chunking down on the cause effect, really, to a certain point. We should go into more detail as we go along. But what's quite interesting, really, when I sort of was the goal to deconstruct the problem for her, not solve the issue, but I'm sort of deconstructing the issue a little bit. What was quite fascinating is that when I talked about presenting, I said to her, have you ever presented at break time and you felt good about presenting? And she, quite interestingly, she went into visual recall. And she went to visual recall, and I found it quite interesting really that she would go into visual recall, because it was more than likely that she was sort of recalling a time it didn't go well in adverse to going well, that sort of link between her own experiences. So in my mind, I felt at that point, it's more than likely she's recalling a time where it didn't go well, because you saw a physiology shift as well too. But we'll go into that in more detail because it's quite significant in one sense, so we'll talk about that. We touched on synesthesia on the first part of the course, but we'll go into it But anyway, the thing to think about is what you're associating to. What you're associating to the experience. So when the person says it's table topping time, it's what you're associating to. And we all have our own association. Are you excited to speak, to go out there? Are you nervous? And so on and so forth. So it's all relative for each individual, but equally in saying that we all have an association, which is why I try to change the perception with a couple of questions to loosen the rigidity. So when you feel nervous, your heart's pounding all the time. So changing the perception. I ask the outcome questions. How do you want to feel? And so on and so forth. And it's quite interesting, really, because we get in situations where it's not the event itself, it's the meaning of the event. So, for example, you have a footballer who's got to take a penalty, and he might score, or she might score 100 out of 100 in training, but put him in a big game, and they really struggle. They get nervous, they get clammy as they sort of step up to take the penalty. You get all nervous and clammy. So I had a player one time I was working with in a penalty shootout, and he got really, really nervous. But he's a really good technical player, and as he's going to take the penalty, he said, I feel really nervous, I don't think I can take it. But he's really technically good. He goes, I feel really jittery. Got the butterflies, and so on and so forth. And he's like really nervous, and he's walking out like this, and he's literally like shaking like a leaf. Okay? And he's got to take this penalty, in a penalty shootout, and he's literally like, like that. I saw him, he caught my eye, and I thought, wow, if he takes a penalty like that, not much of a chance, as you do, but these things happen. And I asked him, I said, okay, how would you like things to be different? How do you want to feel? Just sort of interrupt the pattern. He's a very talented player. So you'd expect their eyes to go into construct an image, but his eyes go to recall. So he's recalling the image. He goes, I want to be free of this anxiety, Jim. What do you think? And I thought at that moment, you got fuel. So you got some fuel, how would you describe? So it's almost like fuel. You got like a fire and you're burning fuel. So he's going into recall, and he's saying, I want to be anxiety free. At that moment, have a realization. He's probably reflecting on times he's missed penalties in similar situations. And that's compounding to the feeling he has, and so on and so forth. So he actually scored, to be fair. And I'm not putting down him scoring the goal through me doing what I did, but equally in saying that, it's important sometimes we sort of get stuck, don't we, in certain situations. So, for me, the meta model, which you go into more detail, has been an important model. And I remember practicing the model, years ago. I remember when I was traveling through Europe for sport. I was in my early 20s. I was traveling around Europe and the UK and America, and I'd learnt about NLP a few years earlier. I was quite fortunate. I've learnt about NLP very early on in hypnotherapy. 17, 18 years of age, I sort of was exposed to it for me to develop myself as a person in sport. But equally, I then started my learning journey. And I wanted to practice more and more, as one does, as you do. I also came across these sort of power questions in Tony Robbins' Awaken the Giant Within. And I think that was the book it was. I stand corrected. They're quite powerful questions you would get people to ask themselves, which I'll go into more detail a bit later. But me, to practice the model, I remember one time I was on this train from Paris to Rome, and it's quite fascinating because you go on the train at Paris, and as you're sort of going towards Rome, you start to notice the language changing. The dialect, the language. It's quite fascinating to think that proximity, from here to here, a whole different language, a whole different way of speaking. It's something that I'll go into later because it's quite useful to know. But what I would do as I'm traveling and practicing the model, I would do, and you might want to do these questions too to practice the model. They're really, really good questions to sort of get you to practice the model. I would ask people questions like, what specifically, who specifically, and how specifically. So what I would do, I'd ask these questions like, I'd ask questions like, okay, I'd have conversations with people and ask questions like, what specifically? I'd ask questions like, who specifically? And I'd ask questions like, how specifically? And I'd ask people these questions, so what specifically? I'd gather information from them. I'd make the focus on them, on their map. Okay, I'd make the focus on their map, and every 3 questions or so, they'd ask me information. So if they asked me to give information, I'd wait for 3 questions to give a bit back. So I wouldn't give anything back until I had like a rule, 3 or 4 questions, and then I would give some back. But I wouldn't give too much back, I'd just give enough back to get in tune with their map. But what I would do, what's really important, because if you ask someone what specifically, who specifically, and how specifically, it can be a little bit intrusive. Obviously, it was a matter of context, so we'd go into conversation, and I might have a conversation about a certain town, about sport, any conversation for that matter. But equally, what I would do, I'd use what we call softness. And if you're going to speak to someone and help them to loosen that rigidity, it might be worth considering, because this can be an intrusive model. So I'd say, okay, I'm curious. So if I say, what specifically are you angry about? Who specifically are you angry with? How specifically are you angry with that person? It'll be different if I say, I'm curious to know. Okay? I'm curious to know what you're angry about. I'm curious to know who. I wonder, can you tell me? Does that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, okay. So use that softener, and also tone of voice too. Okay? So if someone comes up and says, you made me angry. Okay. What did I make you angry about? Yeah.
Dina be like, you're so condescending.
Yeah. I'm curious to know. And I might still, I'm curious to know. What are you angry about?
I feel like that.
Yeah, exactly. So, but that might sound equally, if not even more, but the softness is quite useful. So if someone gives you a problem that they have, so if someone sort of gift wraps you a problem that they want solving, okay, I feel anxious about presenting. I feel scared about taking the penalty. I'm curious to know. Okay, I wonder. Can you tell me? Okay, so, and we'll talk more about that as we go along, but I think it's really useful to do and to practice. It's a really, really good exercise for people, even who've got a lot of experience of using the model. Really, really good exercise to do is to do the map of the world. Get into the map of the world. Get interested about people. I've always been fascinated, in case you haven't noticed, about people's behaviour. But it's a great, a really, really good way to understand their map. So I would do 3 questions, and if they asked to give information on me, I'd wait 3 questions. Sometimes they wouldn't. They'd be so wrapped up in their own, as they do. But I'm curious to know. Okay. Okay. And think about it this way, okay. So this is a table. Do we all agree it's called a table? Mm-hmm. Okay, so we all agree. At one point in your life, would you agree you wouldn't have known it's a table? Would you always have known that this is called a table? Is there a point in your life you think you may not have known it's called a table? Yeah, exactly. So what do you think happened?
Someone told me there's a table.
Yeah, precisely. So over time, with enough repetition, you associate one with the other and you recognise sounds. Okay, over time. So, okay, I might say, I've just seen a wonderful table. So you're going to make sense of that because you've got generic representation of what a table is. If you didn't know what a table was, what do you think would happen? No idea. Okay, see, if I say it's a beautiful day today, what do you think goes through your mind?
Sunshine, no rain.
Yeah, if that's what sort of works for you for the most part, because you've got a generic representation of what a beautiful day is. Unless you live in the desert, you need some rain, then it might be a bit different then, but equally, okay. So between deep structure okay, and surface structure, we have a number of different types of processes called transformations. Okay, Noam Chomsky, who I'll be sort of going into a bit more detail as we go along, he actually coined the term deep structure, transformational grammar, but I'll go into that in more detail as we go along. Actually, as it happens, a really, really good book, by the way, and I'm not in commission for the book. I'm not in commission. A really, really good book, a really up-to-date book. It's a really, really good book. It's by a guy called Steven Pinker. And I'll sort of go into a bit more detail. Linguistics as a window to understanding the brain. Really, really good book. You get a chance to read that. I'm on no commission for it, but it's a really, really great book. And I believe that you might be able to see some stuff on him on YouTube, and certainly I think he's got his own podcast and really, really fascinating stuff. Really, really worth to have a look at, very much so. Do read that if you get a chance to read that. But the actual meta model itself that we're doing today and sort of discussing at the moment, it was first developed by John Grinder and Bandler and Frank Petruzzi. And they, between 72 and 75, studied people and the way they would communicate. It was coded eventually by Grinder and Bandler eventually, but between 72 and 75, they would study people like Fritz Perls, Gestalt Fritz Perls, Virginia Satir, family therapist, until eventually I would also study Milton Erickson as well, who kind of used this model in a reverse way as well, which we'll go into in more detail as we go along. So if you get a chance to too, by the way, a really good book to read. Here, I'm giving you all these books to read now. I should get commissioned. No one mentions my books, do they, these courses?
I was going to ask you,
yeah.
I'm so glad you said it. Can I get a copy of the business one?
Of course you can, yeah, for sure.
I've got the other one.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great book, that business one. If I do say so myself. But NLP, it was one of the first formal models. If you get a chance to read the book by Bandler and Grinder, I don't know if it's still available. You'll probably find it somewhere on eBay. The Structure of Magic, Volume 1. If you're struggling, I'll have a copy at home somewhere. I can bring it in. But it's a really, really good book. The Structure of Magic, Volume 1. It's a really, really good book as well. And really, really useful book. And I think the thing is to think about the development of it, studying people like Pearls, Satir, but also the general semantics of Kubitsky, transformational grammar, Chomsky as well. I believe, my understanding is that Grinder did a PhD on, and I stand corrected here, on Chomsky's transformational grammar, something along those lines. I believe so. But someone can email me if it's otherwise. But that was my understanding. But anyway, they modelled one thing we know for sure, that Fritz Perls, Satir, and eventually Erickson. But the model itself, I would say, in my opinion, the biggest influence is probably going to be Perls, Satir, and as in time, it's continued to develop things like transformational grammar, albeit that's changed too. Transformational grammar has changed a lot over the years too. Chomsky's had different ideas, and that in itself is debatable amongst academics too. But equally, in 97, I believe it was, Dr. Michael Hall wrote an updated version on the model, and it was called Communication Magic. And he included some new meta-model programs, meta-model patterns, and a lot of it was based on Kubisky's semantics as well. And I'm pretty sure Michael Hall's book in 97 also, the basis, some of it anyway, was influenced by cognitive therapy, rational emotive therapy, Beck and others too. But that's another book as well that's worth reading too. Michael Hall in 97, the book he wrote was the Communication Magic, at the top of my head, Communication Magic in 97, Michael Hall. But there's a lot out there, but the long story short, the meta model for language, Gridler, Bandler, Structure Magic 75 is what it sort of gets out there. And because basically we talked about in the early part of the course was the map is not the territory. So, okay. I'm trying to make sure I don't misspell. Kubisky said the map is not the territory. So Kubisky, he coined the term literally, the map is not the territory. Okay. We all have our own unique thumbprint. Just like our thumbprint, we all have our own unique reality, our own experience. The meta model is a syntactic model, so it does relates to the language. A couple of tips for using the model, and it's really important too, by the way. Some really important tips for using the model elegantly is be en rapport. So I'm going to use some tips to use the model, which often get overlooked. So you want to make sure you're in rapport with the person you're working with. Okay, you want to make sure you're in deep rapport. What do you think might happen if you're not in deep rapport and you sort of come at someone with a model?
I'm guessing if they're quite intrusive questions, you might be hit with a bit of a brick wall and they might be a bit offended.
Yeah, because you think about the limbic response. I mean, we talk about cause effect. No one can make you angry, and you make yourself angry. No one can make you feel anything other than you choose yourself. But we've got a limbic system. We've got a part of the brain. We've got that part of the brain that if someone fires that you can sort of rile us up a little bit. So yeah, when you're sort of challenging people's beliefs to a point in the way they see the world, you can get an effect. So I think for the most part, being rapport is really important. Okay. Using your voice tone.
Just out of interest, Jimmy, was that the language I used then? Was that I might make them feel that way, or what you're saying is they own that responsibility of that?
Yeah, I mean, I might make them feel that way. So okay, that's almost like saying, well, in the end, it's their interpretation. But equally, in saying that, let's say, for example, you're walking the street and someone was chasing after you. With a hammer, for example, then okay, your reaction is going to be substantial to the situation. So okay, one thing equals this, a complex equivalent, where okay, you don't bring me flowers every Friday. It means you don't love me, for example. So okay, something. But the point being is that okay, in the end, they control their own response. They can have their own appraisal. If I walk down the street at lunchtime and my best friend walks straight past me, then it's my interpretation of what's happened will have an impact on. But ultimately, I choose how I feel to a certain extent, for the most part. But being in rapport is really important. Okay, you're using a soft tone if it works for that person, a gentle speaking tempo. I am curious to know what and who. Okay, be focused without rushing. Okay, take your time. Go into state yourself too. Okay, go into state 2 as well yourself. And remember as well too that what you're using the questions for. So you're recovering lost information. You recover info. To gather information, to clarify meaning. It's a bit like those dots identify limits, give choices, bring someone out of trance even, to a certain extent. The meta model has 3 categories, and they are, I'll write them down for you. The 3 categories are distortions, they are generalizations, and deletion. Okay, they're the 3 categories of the meta model: distortion, generalization, deletion. So, distortion, we talked about how we distort information. Now, for example, I might go to an interview, and as I go to the interview, I start having one of those sort of cartoon pictures above my brain type thing of the interviewer being 10 foot tall, looking like the Axeman, looking like someone out of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, for example, waiting for me. Equally in saying that, in sports we might distort the opposition, but distortion can be a useful thing too, as well, because we're able then to, for example, in this room, health and safety will have distorted, saying there's a safety exit there. They would have anticipated if there's a fire, what you would do. So it can be a useful thing too, to a point, but equally it can get in the way of us going from A to B. So we can distort. We talked more about that. We talked about that in the first part of the course. But distortion can be a useful thing. It's up to us to decide whether it's useful or not useful. That way we're distorting a certain situation. We're interpreting that situation. So distortion meaning, okay, I could see the interview, I could see the presentation, people laughing at me falling over, spilling water over myself. But equally on the other side of things, I could sort of see it for what it is too. I've got something to say, everyone's got to start somewhere, and so on and so forth. But equally it can be a useful thing too. In many ways, you could, you stop at the traffic lights, because if you don't stop at the traffic lights, God knows what can happen after that. So there's certain things that we do. We might not go walking in a certain town after a certain time in the evening, because our brain starts to think, well, if we do that, and it might be a good thing not to do. So, we generalise as well. And I talked about generalisation can be a useful thing too, because you're not relearning stuff every day. So you generalise that you can make a cup of tea, you generalise a lot of things that you do throughout the day, because it's not time consuming. It conserves energy. Okay, if you didn't generalise, the generalisation, you're conserving energy. Your brain's not able to relearn stuff. Like that film I mentioned before, 50 First Dates. Not 50 First Dates. 50 First Dates, where every day she's got to have a video played to her about what she did the day earlier, because she had no short-term memory. And she didn't know love, she didn't know, her short-term memory was gone. So from that point of view, you didn't generalise, relearn stuff every day. That'd be very, very energy consuming. And deletion too. We mentioned earlier about if you didn't delete, if you went to a restaurant, it'll take you longer to talk about the experience than the experience itself. So if someone says, how was your restaurant? Well, you told them every detail. And now I know there's some people out there that do that, by the way. There are some people out there that do that. But equally in saying that, we do know that some people add more detail than others, but point being is that it's neat to know. Being chased by a bear, there's no point going into all the detail, just run. Okay, so within those 3 categories, there's 12 or 13, depends on how you count them, meta model patterns. Okay, another one is mind read, and we will go into all these in more detail after lunch. I don't want to cause cognitive overload, and I'm mindful that the clock is running towards lunch, so we should introduce the patterns and then go into them in more detail as well. Number 2, and these are all in the category of distortion. So we mind read, you've got loss performative, Number 3 is cause effect. Number 4, and I'm sure someone's going to pull me out if I get one wrong. I don't have my manual with me, so I make a mistake. How specifically, what specifically, who specifically, okay, so cause effect. Number 4, complex equivalent. Number 5 is presupposition. Okay, so there, the first category, the distortion. Then we've got the generalizations. Then we go into generalizations. And generalizations are number 6, universal quantifiers. Okay, number 7, model operators. Of necessity and possibility. Okay? And now we go into the deletions. And you've got number 8, a nominalization. Number 9, unspecified verb. Number 10, simple deletion. Number 11, unspecified referential index. Number 12, comparative deletion. Okay. Okay. So
as you were going through them, and I was like looking at the questions and she was
yeah.
naming them.
Yes.
It's making me realise just how challenging the questions can come across.
Very much so. Great point. Fantastic point. Was there anyone specifically that stood out for you?
They don't listen to me.
Mm-hmm.
You must think I'm stupid.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know that's basically the.
I can see how they need to.
How we would challenge that. So
yeah.
so you must think what the category of you must think I'm stupid is a mind read. Okay, it's a mind read because there's no way of knowing that. So how would you challenge that? If someone said that, what would be the counter? What would be the question you would ask that person?
Would this be similar to Sammy's student? I need to go to the toilet.
Well, now we're getting it. Now we're getting it precisely, and we will go into detail. I'm mindful of lunch. We'll go, and I'll do a demonstration as well. Too. Guess will be demonstrated, but we'll do a demonstration.
Okay, great.
But no, you're right, and I think that for sure, and definitely, you know, we want to. You can see now the value in doing the softener.
Yeah.
In the approach. So okay, you can see the value in doing a approach as the softener as well. So the meta model was formalised. So meta model was developed into a recently defined set of linguistic patterns. Okay, that can either facilitate or change or create obstacles in the person's. So the person's got obstacles in their map. It can be quite useful to help the person be aware, if not overcome, the obstacles that they might have. But what's really important, it's not an interrogation technique, because you've got people who become meta model monsters, and you don't want to do that. Okay, you don't want to go home and sort of blast your family for, like, you know, who said so? What? You know, and so on and so forth. And I think it's really important for me, you know, and a good exercise that you can do, actually, come to think of it, is you can identify. This is a really useful exercise too, by the way. If you identify specific events that you know you built a generalization that influenced your behavior. So if you do decide, okay, a specific event that you know you built a specific generalization that influenced behavior, and then sort of you go into a neutral state, so the person you're working with, you go into a neutral state, and notice what they do on the outside. Now, what they're aware of in the inside, to build a generalization, to preserve the influence on their behaviour. Okay, so earlier before I mentioned the woman, the men are bastards, all men are bastards evenings. I didn't go to one of those. I wasn't invited. Not that I want to take an invitation. Feel for fire, as you do. But equally, there's something somewhere at some point. But equally, on the other side of things, she doesn't think her brother or her dad are. Okay? I think it's really important when you do this model to go into state of consciousness prior to the technique yourself, to go, to get people to respond, you have to respond. I think it's really important for yourself to go into a state or to manage your own state. And this is for all techniques, for all processes as well. I think it's useful to meta model ourselves, to do the model to ourselves. And I'll go into briefly before we go for lunch some of the questions I learned from reading Tony Robbins' books that are quite useful too. But being aware of ourselves, our own patterns too. It's a really good tool for me because we talked about perception is projection. You ever see those coaches who they'll ask a question to a client, and before the client gets a chance to answer it, they'll answer it for them? So can you tell me what you're nervous about? Oh yeah, I remember one time I was nervous. Can you tell me what you're anxious about? Yeah, I'm a bit anxious. Well, I remember one time. They don't give the person a chance. Mm-hmm. And for me, sometimes it's projection. Oh, I know what it's like. Oh, the people these days are all like, you know what I mean? It's quite powerful, that. It really, really is. The model is useful way of thinking about how our senses, see, hear, taste, smell, all body sensations interrelate with language. All get meshed up with language, which is basically a secondary form of processing information language. Okay? The generalization is a concept, a direction in your behaviour, an imprint. It has an influence on what you do. If the client says to you, I have a problem, it's different to saying, I have a problem with. I have a problem with. What do you think the difference is between I have a problem and I have a problem with?
Be more specific with you kind of point to
describe more process. Yeah. Precisely. What's really important with your clients is your first 5 minutes. It's crucial. Your interaction. Really, really important that in your first 5 minutes that you really are and make a conscious effort to be really aware of what they're communicating. Okay? Be really, really aware of what the client is communicating. And how do we communicate? What do we communicate with?
Verbally, physically.
Yeah, and if we're led to believe that we communicate most through body language, the 8%, whatever it is, it's going to be close to the mark. It's not 100% for sure. We don't know for sure everybody communicates that much, but we know it's pretty damn close.
Michelle says the chiropractor that there's a hell of a lot that she picks up on before she even lays somebody on the bed to adjust their...
Yeah, if someone walks in like, oh, wait.
She always asks the same question to everybody as they walk through the door, which is, how are you? And that's just her openness to see what they say, because I guess it's exactly that you're
very much so.
Which is, it's a very open question, and I guess the most important thing that's going on for that person at that point in their life is what they're going to mention first as they walk through the door to her.
Yeah, no, very much so. No, for sure. I think that's a really, great point. That's a great point. Deep structure. The term deep structure comes from transformational grammar, which is an older form of grammar studies. There are newer ones now. Also, Chomsky's updated some of his thoughts that he had back in the 60s. If you do get a chance to as well, by the way, it might be worth looking at Noam Chomsky's work. In the 60s, one of the first books he wrote around this area is quite a good read too. I don't recall the book, it'll come to me. But equally in saying that, albeit there are new models now and new ways of looking at things, deep structure is still useful for the purposes of what we're discussing today and beyond. So deep structure, the event is represented by sensory coding of the experience, the fullest possible linguistic description of the event. And we mentioned before, okay, so describe your 2-week holiday. Well, you're not going to tell me every detail. It could take 2 weeks to tell me every detail. You tell me as much detail as you think that you want to express to me in that situation. So it's quite surface structure. So it's surface structure. So you give some of the details in your surface structure. In between your surface structure, we are not getting the picture. A lot of information is being deleted. That's not an issue. If you're coming, if you come home, I've gone to get some milk, or how are you? I'm fine, or whatever. And it's not a big issue in the big scheme of things in everyday life. But where do you think it could be a bit of a problem if we don't get to a deeper structure?
Just touch things on the surface, then, don't you?
Yeah, precisely. So, okay, so for the most part, there's no issue. You've been away on holiday for a week. I don't particularly want to sit down for a week to listen to what your experience was. Some people might do, but equally in saying that, there may be a client who comes to be a problem. And do you think it might be useful to chunk a bit down? Okay, so we talked about before the woman in a situation where when they say table topics, my heart starts beating, I feel nervous, I feel really anxious. So that's cause effect. A is causing B. So how does what he says cause you to feel that way? Well, you mentioned earlier about, I think you mentioned someone making you angry, whatever. So how does he or she make you angry? So how specifically? That's the counter. We're recovering the choice. We're chunking down. Okay, but we will go into more detail after break and go into every pattern. And I think for me, one of the most important concepts proposed by Chomsky, in my opinion, in the way I see the world, was surface and deep structure. Irrelative to the way he is now with it, and he's added to it and changed it along the way. And Chomsky believes about innate capacity, no matter where we are from in the world, generally capacity for language, which is another story for another day. So regardless of where you are in the world, I really think that transformational grammar, also called transformational generative grammar, has been one of the most influential things he's done, because it tries to show the underlying structure, the deeper relations to one thing and another, albeit there has been academics that, Chomsky's theory, they challenge it. But equally saying, I think it was when he first proposed it was excitement, like a gateway, a window, a stethoscope into the mind of people, their thoughts. I think that excitement sort of got curbed a little bit as we realised things are a little more complex than that. But anyway, the likes of academics like, if you get the academic paper by, I think it's Lee Leveri, 1993, top of my head, he talks about deep structure determining the meaning of sentence and structure. It's a phonological expression of deep. So it's a useful paper to read as well. So, I think that when Chomsky coined it, the deep structure and surface structure in the 60s, the excitement that was at the time probably got curbed a bit in the 70s when we sort of had other realizations. But equally in saying that, it was really, really useful. What I would do, there's a paper, a 1962 paper, by the way, The Logical Basics of Linguistic Theory. 62 paper. It was later published as The Current Issues in Linguistic Theory. It's a really fascinating read, 1964.
Sorry, Logical Basics of?
The Logical Basics of Linguistic Theory, and it got later published as The Current Issues in Linguistic Theory, 64. So 1964, Current Issues in Linguistic Theory. Really good read if you get a chance to. But the excitement that the transformational grammar could lead us to meaning, would be positioned to uncover the nature of human thought, probably didn't materialise. Chomsky himself, in 72, no longer claimed that deep structure was the sole level that determines meaning in 72 written paper as well. So he did say that. So he turns his attention not to meaning, but to relatively technical constraints of movement transformations. If you read his work in 72 to 77, Chomsky is, if I get his surname wrong, let me on the wrist. It's C-H-O-M, Chomsky. Yeah. So if you read his work on 72 to 73, he turns his attention more to, not to meaning, but to relatively technical constraints of movement transformation. So it's quite useful to read some of his work, which is fascinating. But equally in saying that, I read a paper one time by Middleton in 1990, and he talks about the analysis of Chomsky's notion of deep structure, and he applies it to a two-level generative structure for melody, harmony, and rhythm. So it's sort of like a chord. A really fascinating insight into how he sort of draws a parallel to a two-level generative structure of melody, when we speak, and it's really the chord progression. So it really is fascinating. But from the meta-model point of view, is how what we think is translated to what we say. And that's why it's quite useful from that point of view, because we never say all that we're thinking. And as we draw to lunch, and if you went to the local cafe for lunch, you'd only tell me what you think is appropriate to tell. But a lot of it would be irrelevant. So the surface structure words never fully represent everything that you mean. So for example, going to a shop, I'm not happy, I think that would be a great idea. Every time we speak, we unconsciously three things to deep structure we have in mind, and we talked about earlier the deletion, generalization, distortion. So it's a way to understand people. They map a lot better. And what do you think the benefit of understanding someone's map, or at least them understanding their map better, or getting a bigger picture?
I guess if you're asking the questions on a deeper level, you're encouraging them to think deeper than beyond.
Yeah, because we only select some of the information available, and deep structure, leave out the rest.
Makes them more aware.
And what we're deleting, what's appropriate, what's the actual issue is, we can uncover. I suppose it's like a window to the mind, like a stethoscope to the mind, in one sense. Because if I say this, well, what do I mean? What's my experience? When we hear the surface structure sentence, we apply our own deletions, distortions, generalizations. What do you think the danger in doing that is? In applying our own. Yeah, because if I ask you what your issue is, if I associate your issue to an issue I have that I think is the same or similar to somebody else, it's my map. So we want to unravel your map. Okay? So real deep structure is made up of images, feelings that cannot be precisely expressed in words. Okay? How we process information, how animals communicate, for example. So, okay, if I'm being chased and I wander away from the tribe, real deep structure is made up of images and feelings that we can't necessarily explain in words. Surface structure, the words that someone uses, contain clues to deep structure and what they really mean, and to the model of the world in which the deep structure is generated from. So what they're saying at a surface structure is giving you a clue. Okay? And who's to say what reality is anyway? And the meta model is the way of recovering deleted, distorted, and generalized information in both the deep structure, what they're saying, and the person's model of the world. It reminds us to be aware of your own distortions, deletions, and generalizations, and not applying them automatically. Okay, and I mentioned before about the coach or the therapist asking the client a question and answering it for them. Okay? And what would happen if you didn't ask the question for them? And what would happen if you did? Okay? So the window of the mind. And what we'll do after break, I'm mindful of lunch now, and I've sort of eaten into your lunch again. I'd be happy. So after lunch, we're going to go into each individual pattern. I'm going to do a demonstration, and without causing cognitive overload, because you can do, and if you get really, really focused on learning the actual label of the pattern itself, it may go away from learning the actual process of unraveling the map and go to a deeper level. So I've got some really good exercises we can do after the break that can really help you get your head around it all. Not that I'm implying you should go on a train from Paris to Rome and mess with everybody's head. So next time you go to Paris to Rome, it's him, he's the one. And what specifically, and who, I'm curious to know. But it really is fascinating because when you, and we'll talk about after lunch, different languages, it's fascinating. Because language and the way we communicate, and I found it really fascinating also different cultures, travelling and speaking to people, and learning enough about the language and learning enough of the language to ask these questions was fascinating. And in my own development of the meta model as well, people have said to me that you do it naturally and normally, and I assure you it took me a long, long time to practice it, but it didn't take me a long time to get use out of it. Yeah. But when I do demonstrate the process, that people say, well, it just runs really smooth and so on and so forth. It took a long time to do that, but it didn't take a long time to get good use out of it. But honestly, the way I would do it was practice it. And I'd do things like be aware, I'd listen to people in conversation. I'd be the one on the bus, listen to conversation, and sort of which pattern is what type thing and associating it. I would be the one who would be asking the questions and holding back. I'd utilise it as well. And equally as well as that, what I would do is quite useful too, is identify patterns people were using on TV, what they were saying, the patterns that we mentioned earlier. So I sort of get a clearer view of which pattern they were using and how I might respond to each and every pattern accordingly, which we'll go into more detail. And really, really, really powerful stuff. But what I would also practice too is going into rapport. So being in rapport, I was going to do it individually to go into deep rapport, because I knew obviously if you're not in rapport, it could sort of wind people up. But for the most part, if someone comes to see you for a session, you're probably going to have enough rapport to know that you have their best interest. But equally in saying that, what's really, really fascinating is that there are certain situations where you can influence and not necessarily change their world, but what you can do is maybe change the outlook they have. And I'll leave you with a short example before we break and have some lunch. I was in some work one time I won't mention the town, and I was working on a program to get people to interact back into society in some way, shape or form, more through sport. It was during the summer period, and the young people who weren't in school or work, and we'd go in and sort of get them playing sport as a way to get them off the street and interactive, and so on and so forth. And we had this sort of philosophical conversation one time with a group of them. And here was me, I had all the good intentions, getting paid next to nothing for doing it, but I had a job in football at the time, and I had a few weeks off in the summertime, so I'm going to join in the fun and games. And I'd sort of get introduced to sports, and people of all ages, it wasn't just young people, some people would join in a bit older as well. We'd get a ball out and play. And we had this philosophical conversation one time with some of the group. And one time I said to the guys, because we got on well with some of the people, and they'd play sport, they really enjoyed it, and it was great. We'd have a kick around and all fun and games. And then we had enough rapport at one point, and when we had enough rapport a few weeks into it, I said, okay, what are you guys' aspirations? And what do you aspire to be? And it sort of went quiet. I think maybe one bridge too far. So I said, what do you guys aspire to be? And they're like, look at me like I've come from a different planet. And I said, you live in a really great country. This country is really great. Got some opportunity to go to university. You can be anything you want to be here. It really is a phenomenal place, and you're very fortunate to be here and in the situation you're in. It's great. And people who try to get to countries like these because of political reasons in their own. But equally in saying that, if you're willing to work, you can make something of yourself, at least in my world. And then we're really, really quiet. And this young man says, well, I'd like to be this, and one person says, I want to be that. I want to work in football like you. And I said, well, if you want to work in football like me, you better get studying, because I was a performance coach and do the work I did to get into it. There's no guarantee you'll get into it, but you've got a better chance. And one guy goes, there's no jobs out there. I'm like, no jobs? And okay, the unemployment statistics were probably 4 or 5%. And I'm sure there is competition for jobs. I said, no jobs? So would you say that's a generalisation? There's no jobs out there when there's 95% of the workforce working in that sense? And I said, okay, there's no jobs out there. How do you know there's no jobs out there? Okay. And I just know. Okay. There's no jobs out there. And then he, cutting a long story short, he turns around and looks at me as we sort of metaboling, and I'm curious to know, and I'm wondering when was the last time you applied for a job. But this is a young man whose parents hadn't worked, his parents hadn't worked, his parents hadn't worked. Not that as a judgment, it's just conditioning to a certain degree. Then the young man says, it's people like you that come here and take our jobs. I'm like, wow. I said, where do you think I'm from, by the way? And he goes, I won't mention the country he said he thought I was from, but for political reasons. Not that it's a great country, the country he said I was from, but I don't want to start to be contentious here. I didn't like that. But and I said, well, I was going to say, well, actually, I'm not from there, but I have been there, and I really enjoy going there. It's a great place and nice people. But I thought, I won't go there. And equally beyond that, if you want to know what happened after that, you've got to buy my book, by the way. We've got to come back after lunch, so to speak. But cutting a long story short, at that point, I sort of loosely mapped the world just enough for him to sort of consider there was a different world out there, if he wanted it. There was a different world out there. And I'd like to think that the technique is so powerful, if it's done in the right way, it can just wobble. Then I've got literally my hands, tied. There's a lot more things we could do and go into, and a lot more advanced communication. Not, I would say more advanced communication models, but there's equally many powerful communication models you could use, as well as this model too. But I've sort of got into this, into an insight. But equally in saying that, I'm not suggesting that this model will change the world, but just think for a moment and imagine if you taught children, you taught young people, you taught to use a model like this to question things. Okay? Politically, and many things. Now, you taught people to question things about economic policy, about foreign policy, about war, and so on and so forth. So I don't want to get contentious political, and we'll sort of keep to the program from a coaching point of view, how powerful this model can be. But from a bigger picture point of view, after we've done more afterwards, just think of the world in general, and feel the capacity to break out of that trance and question things and so on and so forth. Because with that young man...
Yeah, but then I have to answer it for him.
Well, that's a belief. And we'll hold that forth after the break. So on that note, we'll go for lunch.